Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his face as he looked across his wheat fields. The morning sun painted the golden crops in warm light. He had been working since dawn, checking the irrigation lines and making sure everything was ready for harvest. This was his favorite time of day when the world felt peaceful and quiet. His boots crunched on the dry earth as he walked between the rows of wheat. Jake had been farming this land for 15 years, ever since he took over from his father. The A. Work was hard, but it made him happy. He knew every inch of these fields, every slope and dip in the ground, every spot where water collected after rain. The sound started as a low hum in the distance. Jake stopped walking and looked up at the clear blue sky. At first he thought it might be planes from the nearby Air Force base, but the sound grew louder and stranger, like nothing he had ever heard before. Then he saw them. Dark shapes appeared on the horizon, growing bigger as they came closer. They were not planes or helicopters or anything Jake recognized. The shapes were huge and moved in perfect formation across the sky. As they passed overhead, they blocked out the sun and cast long shadows across his wheat fields. Jake stood still and watched as more ships appeared. Dozens of them filled the sky, each one larger than any building he had ever seen. They moved without sound now, floating like massive storm clouds. The sight made his heart beat faster, but he did not run. Morrison men did not run when something strange happened. The ships stopped moving and hung in the air above the town. Jake could see people coming out of their houses, pointing at the sky and talking in excited voices. Some were taking pictures with their phones. Others were getting in their cars, probably trying to drive away from whatever was happening. Jake pulled out his old cell phone and called his wife Linda. She answered on the first ring. "Jake, are you seeing this?" she said before he could speak. "There are huge things in the sky. Amy is scared and I don't know what to do." "I can see them from the fields," Jake said, his voice calm. "Stay in the house with Amy. Keep the doors locked. I'm coming home now." As he walked back toward his farmhouse, Jake saw his neighbor Bill standing in his driveway. Bill was an old veteran who had fought in 3 wars. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Bill. "You ever see anything like this?" Jake called out. Bill shook his head. "Not in all my years of fighting. These aren't from any country on earth, that's for sure." The 2 men stood together and watched the ships. They were so large that Jake could not see where they ended. Strange lights blinked along their sides in patterns that made no sense. The metal looked different from anything humans made, darker and smoother. Then the broadcasts began. Every television, radio, and phone started playing the same message at the same time. The voice was deep and strange, speaking English but with an accent unlike anything Jake had heard. "People of Earth," the voice said, "we are the Zephyrian Empire. Your world now belongs to us. We have conquered 40 star systems and defeated countless species. Resistance is meaningless." Jake felt a chill run down his back. He thought about Linda and Amy waiting for him at home. He thought about his wheat fields and the harvest that was almost ready. Everything he cared about was suddenly under threat from beings he could not understand. "However," the voice continued, "our laws require us to offer you one chance. Choose your greatest warrior. If they can defeat our champion in single combat, we will leave your world in peace. If they fail, you will serve us forever. You have 7 days to decide." The message ended and the ships remained silent in the sky. Jake looked at Bill, who had gone pale. "Greatest warrior," Bill said quietly. "They'll probably pick some Navy SEAL or Special Forces guy." Jake nodded but said nothing. He was thinking about his grandfather who had fought at Normandy and his father who had served in Vietnam. Both men had told him that sometimes regular people had to do extraordinary things to protect what they loved. He walked home through his wheat fields, feeling the grain brush against his legs. The familiar sight and smell of his crops calmed him a little. This was his land, his family's land. Whatever happened next, he would not let these aliens take it without a fight. When he reached the farmhouse, Linda and Amy were waiting on the porch. Amy ran to him and he wrapped her in a tight hug. "What's going to happen, Dad?" she asked. Jake looked up at the alien ships hanging in the sky like dark promises of war. Then he looked down at his daughter's worried face. "I don't know yet," he said, "but we're going to be okay. The Morrison family has been through hard times before. We'll get through this too." That night, Jake sat on his porch and watched the ships. Their lights blinked steadily against the stars. Somewhere up there was a warrior who had never lost a fight. Somewhere down here was Earth's champion, whoever that might be. Jake had no idea that his quiet life as a farmer was about to change everything. 3 days had passed since the alien ships appeared in the sky. Jake watched the news every morning while drinking his coffee. Military leaders from around the world were meeting in emergency sessions. Everyone was talking about who would be chosen as Earth's champion. The news showed soldiers training at military bases, Navy SEALs doing impossible exercises, MMA fighters practicing their deadliest moves, Olympic athletes pushing their bodies to the limit. All of them wanted the chance to fight for humanity. Jake turned off the television and went outside to check his wheat. The crop was almost ready for harvest. He had spent years learning the right time to cut the grain. Too early, and it would not be fully grown. Too late, and it might spoil. Timing was everything in farming. His neighbor Bill came walking across the field, moving faster than usual. Bill's face was red and he was breathing hard. "Jake, you need to see this," Bill said. "Turn on Channel 7 right now." They went back inside where Linda was making breakfast. Jake turned on the television and found the news channel. A reporter was standing outside the Pentagon, looking excited and worried at the same time. "The alien champion has been revealed," the reporter said. "Military sources tell us his name is Vextar the Unconquerable. He stands 12 feet tall and has never lost a single battle in 300 years. The screen showed grainy footage of a massive figure in strange armor. Even through the poor video quality, Jake could see that this was not like anything human. Vexatar moved with deadly grace, his crystalline armor reflecting light in sharp patterns. When he turned his head, Jake saw eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. "The alien has defeated warriors from dozens of worlds," the reporter continued. "Military experts say he moves faster than human eyes can follow and is strong enough to crush steel with his bare hands." Linda set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "How can anyone fight something like that?" she whispered. The news switched to show various human champions being considered. Commander Rick Stone of the Navy SELs was the leading candidate. Jake watched video of Stone completing incredible training exercises. The man could run for miles, lift enormous weights, and fight multiple opponents at once. "If anyone can do it's him," Bill said. But his voice did not sound confident. Jake said nothing. He was thinking about something his grandfather had told him long ago. "The biggest opponent isn't always the strongest one," the old man had said. "Sometimes the biggest one falls the hardest." That afternoon, Jake was fixing a broken fence when an old pickup truck came down his dirt road. He did not recognize the vehicle, but something about it seemed familiar. The truck stopped near his house, and an elderly Native American man got out. The man was small and bent with age, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He wore simple clothes and walked with a wooden cane. Jake had never seen him before, but he felt like he should know who this was. "You are Jake Morrison," the old man said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "Can I help you with something?" "My name is Pete Standing Bear. I have come a long way to meet you." Jake set down his tools and walked closer. There was something about this man that commanded respect. He moved slowly but with great purpose, like he knew secrets that others did not. "I have been watching the news," Pete said. "Everyone talks about warriors and soldiers. They think the strongest fighter will save humanity." "Makes sense to me," Jake said. "This Vextar has never been beaten. We need someone who can match his strength." Pete shook his head slowly. Strength is not always about muscles and weapons. Sometimes the greatest power comes from understanding the earth and growing things instead of destroying them. Jake did not understand what the old man meant. I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about fighting aliens. That is exactly why. You might succeed where warriors fail, Pete said. Before Jake could ask what he meant, Pete got back in his truck and drove away. Jake watched the dust clouds settle on his road and wondered what the old man was talking about. 2 days later, the world watched as Commander Rick Stone faced Vextar in a preliminary challenge. The fight took place in a neutral zone, broadcast live to every television and computer screen on Earth. Jake and his family gathered around their old television set like millions of other families. Stone was everything a human warrior should be. Fast, strong, skilled, and brave. He had trained his entire life for combat. When he stepped onto the field, he looked ready to fight anyone or anything. Vextar made Stone look like a child. The alien moved so fast that the cameras could barely follow him. His first strike sent Stone flying 20 feet through the air. The second attack knocked the SEAL unconscious before he could even raise his guard. The fight lasted 8 seconds. Jake stared at the television screen in horror. If Earth's best warrior could not last 10 seconds against Vextar, what hope did anyone have? Around the world, people began to panic. Some tried to flee to remote areas. Others prepared for the end of human civilization. But Pete Standing Bear appeared at the United Nations the next morning. Jake saw him on the news, standing before world leaders and speaking in his quiet, firm voice. The prophecy speaks of one who feeds the earth being humanity's true protector. Pete told the assembled delegates, "You have chosen fighters, but you have not chosen a guardian." Most of the world leaders looked confused or angry. General Patricia Hayes stood up and spoke loudly. "We need a trained soldier, not some mystical nonsense. This is about survival, not ancient stories." But Pete continued speaking. "There is a man in Kansas who understands what it means to protect and nurture. He knows that true strength comes from working with nature, not against it. If you will listen, I will tell you about Jake Morrison." Jake nearly choked on his coffee when he heard his name on the television. Linda grabbed his arm and Amy stared at the screen in shock. "This is impossible," Linda said. "They can't be talking about you." But they were. Pete Standing Bear was telling the world about a farmer who might be humanity's last hope. The phone rang at 5 in the morning. Jake was already awake, sitting on his porch and watching the sunrise. He had not slept well since Pete Standing Bear mentioned his name on television. The world was watching him now, and he did not like the attention. Linda answered the phone inside the house. Jake heard her talking in a worried voice. Then she came outside with the cordless phone in her hand. "It's for you," she said. "Someone from the government." Jake took the phone. A woman's voice spoke clearly and professionally. "Mr. Morrison, this is General Patricia Hayes from the Pentagon. We need to talk to you immediately." "About what?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "About saving the human race," the general said. 2 hours later, a black helicopter landed in Jake's wheat field. The wind from its rotors bent the grain flat and kicked up clouds of dust. Jake watched men in military uniforms get out and walk toward his house. They moved like soldiers, alert and ready for trouble. General Hayes was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She shook Jake's hand firmly and looked him up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "The old Indian says you're our best hope against this alien. I think that's crazy, but we're running out of options." Jake looked past the general toward his wheat fields. The grain was ready for harvest, but that seemed less important now. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Fight Vextar in single combat. Winner takes all. If you lose, humanity becomes slaves to the Zephyrian Empire." The words hung in the air between them. Jake thought about his daughter Amy, who was hiding inside the house. He thought about his wife Linda, who was probably crying in the kitchen. He thought about all the people on Earth who had no idea that their fate might depend on a simple farmer. "I've never fought anyone in my life," Jake said. "I don't know how to use weapons or do martial arts. I grow wheat and corn and raise a few cattle. That's all I know." General Hayes nodded. "That's what I told them at the Pentagon. But the president thinks we should listen to Standing Bear. Something about ancient wisdom and different kinds of strength." Jake was quiet for a long moment. He watched a hawk circle over his fields, hunting for mice in the grain. The hawk was not the biggest or strongest bird, but it was patient and smart. It knew how to wait for the right moment. "If I say yes," Jake asked, "what happens next?" "We give you the best training we can in the time we have left. 3 days to learn everything possible about combat and strategy. Military experts will teach you to fight." Jake shook his head. 3 days to learn what soldiers spend years studying. That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't," the general agreed, "but it's all we have." That evening, Pete Standing Bear returned to Jake's farm. The old man sat on the porch steps and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and red. "You spoke to the military," Pete said. "They want me to fight an alien warrior who's never been defeated," Jake replied. "They want me to save the world." "And what did you tell them?" Jake was quiet for a while. He listened to the sounds of his farm in the evening, cattle lowing in the distance, wind rustling through the wheat, his wife and daughter talking quietly in the kitchen. "I told them I needed time to think," Jake said finally. Pete nodded. "Good. Rushing into decisions is how warriors get killed. Farmers know that timing matters more than speed." "But I'm not a warrior. How can I fight something that defeated Earth's best soldiers in seconds?" The old man smiled. "You're thinking like them. They see a fight between two warriors. But this is not about being a better warrior. This is about being something the alien has never faced before." "What do you mean?" Pete pointed toward Jake's wheat fields. "Tell me what you see." Jake looked at his crops. Wheat ready for harvest, about 40 acres worth. Should bring a good price if the weather holds. The alien sees food growing in neat rows. He has never grown anything in his life. He has only destroyed things. You see timing, weather, soil conditions, irrigation needs. You see a living system that requires patience and understanding. Jake began to understand what Pete was saying. "You think I should fight him like a farmer, not like a soldier." "I think you should be yourself. Warriors train to defeat other warriors. What happens when a warrior faces someone who is not trying to be a warrior at all?" The next morning, military Sci-Fi vehicles arrived at Jake's farm. Soldiers set up training equipment in his fields. Colonel Frank Miller was in charge of Jake's combat training. He was a tough man with scars on his hands and a voice like gravel. "We're going to teach you basic, hand-to-hand combat," Miller said. "Weapons training, tactical movement, everything we can fit into 3 days." Jake tried to learn the fighting techniques, but his body did not want to move like a soldier's. He was used to the slow, steady movements of farm work. Quick combat strikes felt wrong and awkward. After 2 hours of failed training, Jake was frustrated and tired. "This isn't working," he said. "I'm not built for this kind of fighting." Miller agreed. "You're too slow, and you don't have the killer instinct. Against a normal human, you might have a chance with more training. Against Vextar, you'll be dead in seconds." Dr. Susan Rodriguez arrived that afternoon with files full of information about Zephyrian biology. She was a scientist who studied alien life forms, though she had never seen one in person before. "Vexitar's species is built for combat," she explained to Jake. "Their bones are denser than ours. Their muscles are 3 times stronger. Their reflexes are faster than anything we've measured." "So I can't outfight him," Jake said. "Not in any conventional way. His armor is nearly indestructible. His weapons can cut through steel. He's been trained since birth to kill efficiently." Jake studied the files and videos of Vextar fighting other champions. The alien moved like liquid death, flowing from one attack to another without wasted motion. But Jake noticed something that the military experts had missed. "He always moves the same way," Jake said. "Perfect technique, but always the same patterns." Dr. Rodriguez looked at the videos again. "You're right. His movements are optimized for maximum efficiency against trained fighters." "What happens if he faces someone who doesn't fight like a trained fighter?" Jake asked. That evening, Jake made his decision. He called General Hayes and told her he would accept the challenge. But he had one condition. "I want to train on my own farm, using my own methods," he said. "Mr. Morrison, we have the best combat instructors in the world ready to help you, and they can't teach me anything useful in 3 days. But maybe the land can." General Hayes was quiet for a moment. "What exactly are you planning?" Jake looked out at his wheat fields in the evening light. "I'm going to be a farmer," he said. Jake woke before dawn on the day of the challenge. He had spent the last 3 days preparing in his own way, working his fields and thinking about the battle ahead. The military experts thought he was wasting time, but Pete Standing Bear had watched approvingly from the porch. Linda was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. She had not slept much either. Dark circles showed under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she poured the coffee into Jake's favorite mug. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "We could run away. Take Amy and disappear somewhere." Jake sipped his coffee and looked out the window at his wheat fields. The grain was golden in the early morning light, ready for harvest. He had planned to cut it this week, but now that seemed like something from another life. "Running won't help," he said. "These aliens conquered 40 star systems. They'd find us eventually. Besides, Morrison men don't run when people need protecting." Amy came into the kitchen wearing her school clothes, then remembered there was no school today. The whole world was watching the challenge that would decide humanity's fate. She sat next to her father and leaned against his shoulder. "Are you scared, Dad?" she asked. Jake thought about lying to make her feel better, but he had always been honest with his daughter. "Yes, I'm scared, but sometimes being scared means you're doing something important." A convoy of military vehicles arrived at sunrise. General Hayes got out of the lead truck, followed by Colonel Miller and Dr. Rodriguez. News crews were setting up cameras along the road, preparing to broadcast Jake's departure to billions of viewers. "It's time," General Hayes said. Jake hugged Linda and Amy goodbye. His wife whispered in his ear, "Come home to us." His daughter pressed a small object into his hand. It was a smooth stone she had found by the creek, painted with the words, "World's Best Dad." Jake put the stone in his pocket and walked toward the military truck. Pete Standing Bear was waiting by the vehicle, holding a small cloth bag. "For the battle," Pete said, handing Jake the bag. Jake looked inside and saw ordinary things. A coil of rope like farmers used to tie hay bales. A small bucket that looked like it came from a barn. A handful of seeds that might have been wheat. "Or corn? These are just farm tools," Jake said. "Yes," Pete replied. "Be a farmer." The journey to the battle site took 2 hours. Jake sat quietly in the back of the military truck, thinking about his grandfather's stories from World War II. The old man had always said that wars were won by regular people doing extraordinary things, not by heroes doing what heroes were supposed to do. The neutral zone was a flat field outside Denver, chosen by the aliens as suitable for single combat. Military barriers kept the crowds back, but Jake could see thousands of people watching from the hills around the area. News helicopters circled overhead like metal vultures. Vextar was already waiting in the center of the field. Jake's first sight of the alien champion made his mouth go dry. Vextar stood 12 feet tall, covered in crystalline armor that reflected the morning sun like sharp mirrors. His limbs were longer than human proportions, giving him an unsettling insect-like appearance. Energy weapons hummed at his sides, ready to kill at a moment's notice. When Vextar moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator. He had never lost a battle in 300 years. He had defeated warriors from dozens of worlds, each thinking they were strong enough to challenge the Zephyrian champion. General Hayes walked with Jake to the edge of the combat zone. "You can still change your mind," she said. "We could find another champion?" Jake shook his head. "Who else would you choose? Your best soldier lasted 8 seconds. Dr. Rodriguez handed Jake an earpiece. "We'll be monitoring the battle. If you need tactical advice, we can help." Jake looked at the tiny device and handed it back. "I won't be able to hear you over the sound of my heart beating." He walked alone across the field toward Vexatar. Each step took him further from the safety of human civilization and closer to an alien that had conquered star systems. The grass was soft under his boots, recently watered and green. It reminded him of his pastures back home. Vextar watched Jake approach with glowing eyes that showed no emotion. The alien's translator device spoke in perfect English, though with a strange, mechanical accent. "You are Earth's champion," Vextar said. It was not a question, but it sounded like one anyway. "I'm Jake Morrison," Jake replied. "I grow wheat and corn in Kansas." The alien tilted his head, confused by this information. He had faced knights and soldiers, gladiators and mercenaries. He had never faced a farmer. "You do not appear to be a warrior," Vextar observed. "I'm not," Jake said honestly. "I'm just a man trying to protect his family and his world." For the first time in 300 years, Vextar faced an opponent who confused him. This human carried no weapons except primitive tools. He wore no armor except work clothes. He moved without the trained precision of a fighter. A Zephyrian official announced the beginning of the challenge. The formal words meant that one of them would not leave the field alive unless mercy was granted by the winner. Jake opened Pete's cloth bag and took out the coil of rope. Vextar watched with growing puzzlement as the human began moving around the field in strange patterns. Jake was not attacking or defending. He was doing something that looked like farm work. The alien had trained his entire life for combat against warriors. His fighting style was perfect for defeating trained fighters who used proper techniques and logical strategies. But Jake was not fighting like a warrior at all. Jake moved the way he moved in his wheat fields, checking irrigation lines and planning the day's work. His steps followed the natural contours of the ground. His movements flowed with the wind, instead of against it. When Vextar struck with lightning speed, Jake was already somewhere else, not because he had dodged, but because he had never been standing still. The watching world held its breath as Earth's strangest champion began the most important battle in human history. Military experts shook their heads in confusion. News reporters struggled to describe what they were seeing, but Pete Standing Bear smiled and nodded approvingly. The farmer was being a farmer, and that was exactly what the world needed. Vextar's first real attack came like a thunderbolt. The alien moved faster than human eyes could follow, striking where Jake had been standing a moment before. But Jake was no longer there. He had moved like a man following a plow line, steady and purposeful, guided by instincts older than warfare. The battle for humanity's survival had begun, and for the first time in his life, the unconquerable Vextar faced an opponent who made no sense at all. Vextar's confusion grew as the battle continued. He had fought thousands of opponents across the galaxy, but none had ever moved like this human farmer. Jake flowed across the field like wind through wheat, never following the patterns that warriors were taught. The alien struck again, his crystalline blade cutting through the air where Jake's head had been. But the farmer was already moving, bending down to scatter seeds from Pete's bag across the ground. The movement looked casual, like he was planting his spring crop, but it put him exactly where Vexatar's follow-up attack could not reach. Watching from the barriers, military experts tried to understand what they were seeing. Colonel Miller spoke into his radio with frustration. He's not fighting at all. He's just wandering around like he's doing chores. Dr. Rodriguez studied Jake's movements through binoculars. No, there's a pattern here. Look at how he's changing the terrain. Jake took the small bucket from Pete's bag and poured water in seemingly random spots across the field. To the alien warrior, this made no sense. Water was not a weapon. Seeds were not ammunition. Rope was not armor. Yet somehow these simple tools were keeping the human alive against strikes that could cut through steel. Vextar increased his speed, launching a series of attacks that should have ended the fight instantly. His blade moved in perfect arcs, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency. But Jake was never where the calculations said he should be. The farmer moved like he was checking fence posts or examining soil conditions. He stepped over the rope he had laid across the ground, ducked under imaginary tree branches, and sidestepped puddles of water with the same natural flow he used when working his fields. For 300 years, Vextar had defeated opponents by being faster, stronger, and more skilled than them. He could predict their movements because they all fought according to established patterns. Warriors moved in certain ways, used specific techniques, followed logical strategies. Jake Morrison followed no strategy except the one he had learned from 30 years of farming. He read the wind like a farmer reads weather. He felt the slope of the ground through his boots. He moved with the patient rhythm of someone who knew that nature always won through persistence, not force. The aliens. Perfect form began to break down. His strikes became less precise as frustration clouded his judgment. He had never faced an opponent who seemed to be ignoring the rules of combat entirely. Jake's rope lay scattered across the field in loops and coils. The seeds he had scattered were already making the ground treacherous for someone wearing heavy armor. The water had turned patches of earth into slippery mud. None of these were weapons, but together they transformed the battlefield into something resembling a working farm. Vextar charged forward with deadly intent, putting all his alien strength into a strike that could have split a tree trunk. But his foot landed on scattered seeds and slipped sideways. His perfect balance wavered for just a moment, and Jake was there with the rope. The farmer moved like he was tying down a tarp in strong wind, quick and efficient motions born from years of practice. The rope wrapped around Vextar's legs not like a weapon, but like a tool being used for its intended purpose. The aliens stumbled, caught off guard by this completely non-military application of simple farm equipment. For the first time in 300 years, Vextar fell. The watching world gasped as the greatest warrior in the galaxy hit the ground. He tried to rise immediately, but the rope tangled his legs and the muddy ground provided no stable footing. His crystalline armor, perfect for deflecting energy weapons, offered no help against the basic physics of wet soil. Jake stood over the fallen alien, breathing hard but not from exhaustion. He was thinking the way farmers think when they have to solve a problem with the tools at hand. Vextar was down but not defeated. The alien's strength was still far greater than human. His weapons could still kill with a single strike. But something had changed in the alien's glowing eyes. The absolute confidence was gone, replaced by something Vextar had never experienced before. Uncertainty. "You fight strangely," Vextar said, his translator making his voice sound mechanical and confused. "I'm not fighting," Jake replied. "I'm just doing what farmers do." The alien struggled to understand this concept. In his culture, there were only warriors and the conquered. The idea of someone who grew things instead of destroying them was foreign to his thinking. Jake could have struck then. Vextar was tangled and off balance, vulnerable for the first time in centuries. The watching humans expected their champion to press his advantage, to end the threat while he had the chance. Instead, Jake did something that no warrior in galactic history had ever done. He extended his hand to help Vextar stand up. "Come on," Jake said. "Let's get you out of that mud." Vextar stared at the offered hand in complete bewilderment. This made no tactical sense. The human had gained a decisive advantage and was throwing it away. In every battle Vexitar had ever fought, enemies tried to kill him when he was down. But Jake Morrison was not an enemy. He was a farmer, and farmers helped neighbors who fell down, even if those neighbors were 12-foot-tall alien warriors who had come to conquer Earth. "You could end me now," Vexitar said, his voice filled with wonder. "Why would I do that?" Jake asked. "You're not trying to hurt me anymore. You're just confused." The alien took Jake's hand and allowed himself to be helped to his feet. The simple human gesture cracked something deep in Vexitar's worldview. He had spent 3 centuries believing that strength meant domination, that victory meant destruction. This farmer was showing him a different kind of strength entirely. "I do not understand," Vexitar admitted. "You have defeated me, but you show mercy. This is not how warriors behave." Jake smiled and handed Vexitar the bucket of water. "That's because I'm not a warrior. I'm just a farmer who wants to go home and harvest his wheat." Around the field, humans held their breath and waited to see what would happen next. The battle was not over, but something fundamental had changed. The greatest warrior in the galaxy was learning that there were ways to be strong that had nothing to do with winning fights. Vexitar looked at the bucket in his hands, then at the human who had given it to him. For the first time in his long life, he began to understand that true strength might not come from conquest after all. Vexitar stood in the muddy field holding the bucket Jake had given him. Water dripped from his crystalline armor, and seeds stuck to his feet. For 300 years, he had been the most feared warrior in the galaxy. Now he looked like someone who had fallen while working on a farm. The silence stretched across the battlefield as millions of humans and Zephyrians watched through their screens. Nobody knew what would happen next. The formal challenge was still in progress, but the rules no longer seemed to apply. "Why did you help me?" Vexitar asked. His translator made his voice sound curious rather than threatening. Jake wiped his hands on his work shirt and looked at the alien warrior. "You're not my enemy. You're just doing what you were taught to do, like a seed planted in the wrong kind of soil." "I do not understand this comparison." Jake gestured toward the scattered seeds on the ground around them. "Seeds need the right conditions to grow. Plant corn in sand and it dies. Plant it in good soil with enough water and it feeds people. You were planted in a warrior culture, so you became a warrior. But maybe you could grow into something else." Vexitar had never heard anyone talk this way. In Zephyrian society, you were born to fight, and you died fighting. There were no other choices, no other ways to be strong. "What else could I become?" the alien asked. "Anything you want," Jake said simply. "That's what freedom means." The words hit Vexitar like a physical blow. Freedom. The concept was foreign to his species, but hearing it from this strange human made something shift deep inside his mind. General Hayes spoke urgently into her radio from the observation area. "What's happening out there? Is the challenge over or not?" Colonel Miller watched through binoculars, trying to understand the scene. "They're talking. Morrison isn't attacking, and the alien isn't either. This has never happened before in recorded galactic history." Dr. Rodriguez studied the alien's body language through her instruments. "Look at Vexitar's posture. He's not in combat stance anymore. He's listening." Pete Standing Bear sat quietly on a folding chair, smiling as he watched his prophecy unfold. The one who feeds the earth was teaching the destroyer about growth instead of conquest. Vexitar set down the bucket and looked at his hands. They were designed for holding weapons, built for dealing death across the stars, but they were also capable of gentleness, though he had never used them that way. "You showed me mercy when you could have struck," the alien said. "In my culture, mercy is considered weakness." "In mine, mercy is considered strength," Jake replied. It takes more power to help someone than to hurt them. The alien warrior considered this carefully. Every victory in his long career had been achieved through superior force. He had never won a battle by helping his opponent, because that would have been impossible under the old rules. But Jake Morrison had changed the rules completely. "I formally concede this challenge," Vextar announced loudly enough for all the monitoring devices to hear. "The human has defeated me not through superior combat skill, but through superior wisdom." Around the world, humans erupted in celebration. They had won. Earth would remain free. The invasion was over. But Jake felt no desire to celebrate yet. Something more important was happening. Vextar activated his communication device and spoke to the Zephyrian fleet hovering above the clouds. "I am calling off the conquest of this world. The humans have taught me something that changes everything." The response came immediately in harsh alien tones. Vextar's translator converted the words for Jake to hear. "You have disgraced the Empire. Return to the ships immediately for punishment." But Vextar shook his head. "I will not return. I request permission to remain on Earth as a diplomatic ambassador. These humans have knowledge that our Empire needs to learn." The alien fleet commanders argued among themselves for several minutes. Finally, they agreed to Vextar's request, though their voices carried clear disapproval. The great warrior had fallen not just in combat, but in their estimation as well. Vextar did not seem to care about their opinion anymore. Jake walked over to where Pete Standing Bear was sitting. The old man stood up slowly and nodded with satisfaction. "You did well, farmer," Pete said. "You showed him that strength comes from helping things grow, not from cutting them down." "What happens now?" Jake asked. Pete pointed toward Vextar, who was staring up at the alien ships preparing to leave without him. "Now you teach him how to plant seeds instead of sowing destruction." The massive Zephyrian fleet lifted away from Earth that afternoon, leaving their former champion behind. Vextar stood in Jake's wheat field, looking lost and uncertain for the first time in his long life. "I have nowhere to go," the alien said. "I know nothing except fighting." Jake picked up a handful of wheat seeds from the ground and poured them into Vextar's large palm. "Then it's time to learn something new. These need to be planted before winter comes." Amy Morrison was the first human child to shake hands with a former galactic conqueror. She was not afraid of Vextar, especially after her father explained that the alien was learning how to be a farmer instead of a warrior. Linda Morrison cooked dinner for their strange new guest, though she had to make extra portions to feed someone Vextar's size. The alien ate human food carefully, fascinated by flavors that came from growing things instead of synthetic military rations. News crews from around the world came to Kansas to interview the farmer who had saved humanity, but Jake spent most of his time in the fields, teaching Vextar how to plant corn and operate irrigation equipment. The alien learned slowly but eagerly. His hands, designed for holding weapons, proved surprisingly gentle when handling seedlings. His warrior reflexes helped him identify plant diseases and pest problems with remarkable accuracy. Within a month, other young Zephyrians began arriving, on Earth, curious about the human who had defeated their greatest champion without violence. They wanted to learn about farming, about growing food instead of conquering worlds. Jake's small farm became the most important place on Earth, where former warriors learned to measure success by harvest yields instead of body counts. Vextar proved to be an excellent teacher, helping other aliens understand that strength could be used to nurture life instead of ending it. The story spread across the galaxy like seeds carried on the wind. Other species began to question whether the Zephyrian way of conquest was the only path to strength. Some worlds that had been enslaved started growing their own food again, remembering what it meant to create instead of destroy. Jake Morrison never became famous in the way that warriors become famous. He never wanted parades or medals or monuments built in his honor. He just wanted to harvest his wheat and teach anyone who would listen that the greatest victories come from helping things grow. On quiet evenings, he would sit on his porch with Linda and Amy, watching Vextar work in the fields alongside human farmhands. The former alien warrior had found peace in the rhythm of planting and harvesting, in the patient work of feeding others instead of fighting them. The strongest alien warrior had lost to a human farmer, but in losing he had discovered something more valuable than victory. He had learned what it meant to be truly strong,